In my Father's house are many mansions. That single sentence has shaped how millions of Christians picture eternity. Golden hallways, private estates, heavenly real estate custom built for the faithful. But the word mansions does not appear in the Greek text of John chapter 14. Not once. The word Jesus actually uses is mon, pronounced monē, and it does not describe a mansion, a palace, or anything remotely like a private estate. It describes a place where someone remains, a room, a dwelling, a resting point. And if that sounds like a downgrade, if it sounds like trading a cathedral for a closet, hold on. Because the real meaning is not smaller than a mansion. It is an entirely different kind of promise. When you trace this Greek word through the rest of John's Gospel, a pattern surfaces that most readers never notice, a pattern that transforms this verse from a heavenly real estate announcement into something far more intimate and far more demanding. The question is not how big your room in heaven will be. The question, according to the Greek, is whether you are willing to stay. To understand what Jesus is actually promising, you need to feel the weight of the room where he says it. John chapter 13 opens with a meal. It is the night before Jesus dies, and he knows it. The text is explicit. He knew his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. That phrase, to depart, hangs over every word in the next 5 chapters. Everything Jesus says from this point forward is spoken under the pressure of a goodbye. During supper, Jesus does something that disturbs his disciples. He gets up from the table, wraps a towel around his waist, pours water into a basin, and begins washing their feet. Peter resists. Jesus insists. Then he sits back down and tells them something worse. One of them will betray him. Judas leaves the room. The text adds a detail that feels almost cinematic. And it was night. The group has just gotten smaller, and the darkness outside has moved closer. Then Jesus says, the sentence that creates the emotional crisis behind everything in chapter 14. Where I am going, you cannot follow me now. Peter pushes back immediately. Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. And Jesus answers with the prediction that cuts Peter to the bone. Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. That is the emotional moment immediately before. In my Father's house are many mansions. The disciples are not sitting in a theology seminar asking calm questions about the afterlife. They are panicking. Their teacher has just announced his departure, identified a traitor among them, predicted Peter's failure, and told them they cannot follow. The mood in that room is not curiosity. It is abandonment. And Jesus is not delivering a lecture about heaven's floor plan. He is responding to fear. He is answering the question no one at the table dares to ask out loud. If you leave, what happens to us? Is there still a place for us? The very next words are, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many monai. That word, monai, is the hinge of the entire passage. But before we can hear what it actually means, we need to understand what it does not mean. And that requires a detour. Not into Greek, but into Latin, and then into the history of the English language itself. The Greek noun mon appears exactly twice in the entire New Testament. Only twice. And both times it appears in John chapter 14, in the same conversation, spoken by the same person within 21 verses of each other. The first occurrence is verse 2. In my Father's house are many monai. The second is verse 23, and this is where the meaning becomes impossible to miss. Jesus says, "If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our monē with him." Read those two verses side by side. In verse 2, the monai are in the Father's house, and Jesus is going to prepare them for his followers. In verse 23, the monē is inside the believer, and the Father and Son are coming to establish it. The same word, the same chapter, the same night, but the direction has completely reversed. In verse 2, the believer goes to be with God. In verse 23, God comes to dwell with the believer. Now, if monē meant mansion, verse 23 would mean that God is building a mansion inside you. That makes no sense. But if monē means a dwelling place, a settled presence, a place of remaining, then both verses work perfectly. In verse 2, there is room for you in the Father's presence. In verse 23, the Father makes room in you for his presence. The word is not describing architecture. It is describing intimacy, and that intimacy moves in both directions. Monē comes from the Greek verb menō, pronounced menō. This verb is one of the most important words in John's entire gospel, arguably one of the most important words in all of John's theology. Menō means to remain, to abide, to stay, to dwell. It does not describe a building. It describes a relationship that does not leave, and John uses it relentlessly. The verb appears roughly 40 times in the Gospel of John, far more frequently than in any other book of the New Testament. It is not a side theme. It is the spine of the Gospel. In John chapter 1, when the first disciples begin following Jesus, he turns and asks them, "What are you seeking?" They answer with a question, "Rabbi, where are you staying?" The word is menō. Where are you remaining? And Jesus answers, "Come and see." They went, the text says, and they remained with him that day. Menō again. The first act of discipleship in John's gospel is not a doctrinal confession. It is staying. In John chapter 6, after many followers leave because Jesus' teaching is too hard, he turns to the 12 and asks, "Do you want to go away as well?" Peter answers, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life." The question underneath is a menō question. Will you stay or will you leave? And the answer is, we remain. In John chapter 8, Jesus tells a group of Jews who had believed in him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples." Abide, menō. Discipleship is not a moment. It is a sustained act of remaining. And then in John chapter 15, the same night, the same farewell conversation, Jesus drives the verb home with an image no listener could forget. "I am the vine. You are the branches. Whoever abides in me and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing." Abides, menō. The same root as monē. The branches do not visit the vine. They do not rent space on the vine. They remain. Their life depends entirely on the connection. So when Jesus says in chapter 14, "In my Father's house are many monai," he is using the noun form of the exact verb he will repeat over and over for the next 2 chapters. He is not changing the subject between chapters 14 and 15. He is building one continuous argument about remaining in the presence of God. The monai are not luxury homes waiting at the end of history. They are dwelling places, permanent points of connection between God and his people. And the preparation Jesus speaks of, "I go to prepare a place for you," is not interior decorating. It is the cross, the resurrection, the sending of the Spirit, the events that will make this mutual indwelling possible. But if monē meant something like dwelling place all along, how did the English-speaking world end up picturing golden mansions? The answer begins in the 4th century. When Jerome translated the Greek New Testament into Latin, the translation known as the Vulgate, he rendered monai as mansiones. The Latin word mansio comes from the verb manere, which means to remain or to stay. In Roman usage, a mansio was a way station, an official stopping place along one of the empire's roads, where travelers could rest, change horses, and sleep before continuing their journey. It had nothing to do with wealth or grandeur. A mansio was simply where you stayed for the night. Some Roman roads had mansions spaced roughly 20 to 30 miles apart, and they ranged from basic shelters to more developed inns. The word described function, not luxury. When the King James translators sat down to work in 1611, they rendered Jerome's Latin mansiones into English as mansions. And here is the critical detail. In early 17th-century English, the word mansion still carried its Latin meaning. It meant a dwelling place, an abode, a place of residence. The word had not yet acquired the connotation of size or opulence that it carries today. A mansion in 1611 could refer to any settled dwelling, a room, an apartment, a section of a larger house. The translators were not wrong by the standards of their own language, but English did not stand still. Over the next 4 centuries, mansion narrowed dramatically. It shed its old meaning of dwelling and absorbed a new one: size, luxury, exclusivity, columns, sprawling lawns, iron gates. By the 20th century, when most English-speaking Christians heard, "In my Father's house are many mansions," they were no longer hearing what the King James translators intended. They were hearing something the Greek never said, that heaven is a gated community, and faithful believers receive luxury real estate as their eternal reward. This is not a harmless semantic accident. It redirects the entire theology of the passage. If monai means mansions, then heaven is a reward program. Faith becomes a down payment. Obedience becomes an upgrade. Suffering becomes the price you pay now for the property you receive later. And God becomes a celestial developer, assigning floor plans based on spiritual performance. But if monai means dwelling places, rooms in a father's home where every child has a place, then the promise is not about earning square footage. It is about belonging. It is about a God who looks at a room full of frightened people and says, "There is room for you. You are not being abandoned." This brings us back to the text itself, and to a question that demands honest handling. Does John chapter 14 have anything to do with life after death? Or is the entire passage purely metaphorical? The answer is that it clearly includes a future dimension. Jesus says, "I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also." There is a destination. There is a promise that extends beyond the present life, beyond the current experience of the Spirit. The early church understood this, and it would be dishonest to flatten the passage into pure metaphor as a reaction against the mansion reading. But here is where precision matters. The passage promises presence, not luxury. It promises that the Father's house has room, not that each room is a palace. The image is closer to a large family home where every child belongs than to a neighborhood where each homeowner's lot size reflects their spiritual credit score. Some scholars have also suggested that the word monai may carry an echo of the way stations along a pilgrimage route, resting places on the road to the temple in Jerusalem. If that background is active in the passage, then monai might not describe final destinations at all, but places of rest along the journey toward full communion with God. This reading is interesting and plausible, but it remains a minority position. The strongest evidence for the meaning of monē comes not from Roman roads or pilgrimage routes, but from the word's own use within John chapter 14, and from the overwhelming presence of the verb menō throughout the gospel. Context interprets context, and the context here is relentless, remain, stay, dwell. There is one more connection worth noticing. In John chapter 14, verse 16, Jesus tells the disciples that he will ask the Father to send another helper, the Spirit, who will be with you forever. The word used for the Spirit's relationship with the believers is, again, a form of abiding. The Spirit will remain. The Spirit will dwell. The monē that Jesus goes to prepare is not a building project completed at the end of time. It is inaugurated by the Spirit, sustained by faith, and completed at the return of Christ. The dwelling begins now. The first letter of John, written from the same theological tradition as the Gospel, makes this explicit. 1 John chapter 4, verse 13. By this we know that we abide in him and he in us, because he has given us of his Spirit. The monē, the dwelling, is mutual. God in the believer in God, the Spirit as the bond. That is the architecture of the Father's house. Not marble floors and golden doorknobs, presence and permanence. This matters more than it might seem at first, because the mansion reading has done real damage. Not because anyone intended harm, but because the image quietly reshapes the gospel from a relationship into a transaction. When eternity becomes real estate, faith becomes currency. And a gospel that was supposed to be about grace and belonging becomes a system of spiritual achievement. The person who suffers and doubts begins to wonder if their mansion is getting smaller. The person who thrives begins to assume their obedience has earned them an upgrade. And the entire promise of John chapter 14, spoken to frightened, failing disciples on the worst night of their lives, gets buried under a prosperity theology that Jesus never taught. Because notice who Jesus is talking to. Peter is about to deny him. Thomas is about to say he does not know the way. Philip is about to ask Jesus to show the Father, as if the last 3 years have not been enough. Judas, the other Judas, not the betrayer, is about to ask why Jesus does not reveal himself to the whole world. These are not spiritual champions. These are confused, scared, imperfect followers who are hours away from total failure. And Jesus does not say, "There will be a place for you if you get through tonight without falling apart." He says, "In my Father's house are many dwelling places." Present tense, already real, already available, not contingent on their performance in the next 12 hours. The promise of monē is not that you will be rewarded for your endurance. It is that you will not be left without a home. The Father's house has room. Not because you deserve a room, but because the Father built the house with you in mind. And yet, and this is where the passage cuts both ways, monē is not passive. It is not a ticket punched once and forgotten. It comes from menō, and menō demands something of the one who enters. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word. Abide in me, and I in you. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. The dwelling is a gift, but remaining in the dwelling is an ongoing act. You cannot accept the room and refuse the relationship. You cannot claim the monē while ignoring the menō. This is why the passage is simultaneously the most comforting and the most demanding promise in the Gospels. It says, "You are welcomed." And it says, "Now stay." Do not leave when the cost gets high. Do not walk away when the waiting gets long. Do not mistake the room for the reward, because the reward is not the room. The reward is the one who dwells there with you. For the disciples sitting in that upper room, the promise must have landed differently than it lands in a Sunday sermon today. They were not thinking about the afterlife. They were thinking about the next few hours. Their teacher was leaving. The world outside was hostile. One of their own had just walked out into the night to betray them all. And into that silence, Jesus says, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. There is room for you. I am going to make sure of it, and I am coming back." That was not a real estate brochure. That was a lifeline. So the next time you hear, "In my Father's house are many mansions," pause on the word underneath the English. Mon, a dwelling place, a room where you are not a guest, but a child. A place defined not by its size, but by the presence of the one who lives there with you. The King James translators were not careless. In 1611, mansion still meant what the Greek meant. But English moved, and the word carried the verse away from its roots. What Jesus promised that night was not luxury. It was presence, not a reward for the spiritually accomplished, but a refuge for the spiritually terrified. Not a house you earn, but a home where you are known, and where, if you are willing, you remain. In the Father's house, there are many dwelling places, and the door to every one of them is not a performance review. It is a person. "I am the way," Jesus said. And then he went to prepare the place, not with blueprints, but with his body. Subscribe for more investigations into the original language, history, and context behind Scripture's most familiar passages.